Jesus, Refugee, Renegade, Redeemer, with Bear Grylls, is brought to you by Mercy Ships.
mercyships.org. Be part of the adventure. I'm Bear Grylls, and I've been to the highest point on the planet, and I'm now here at the Dead Sea, at the lowest point in the entire world. Get ready for the ultimate adventure. I'm in Israel, following the footsteps of a man who changed the entire world forever. The refugee, the renegade, and the redeemer, Jesus of Nazareth.
Mountains have always played such a big part in my life in, different ways, and there's something about sometimes just getting away, getting up high, getting that perspective. I don't know, I think it's primal, isn't it? It's in here in our hearts, and I love it. But from here, you can see the whole of the Galilee region, and it's spectacular. You got Nazareth, and then beyond that, the Judean desert, and eventually down to Jerusalem. And this is where Jesus spent so much of his time in this region, drawing people to him. And what he did and what he said and how he interacted with people and how he made people feel was about to set the world ablaze. Pretty committing takeoff down there, straight off the edge, but this is top of the mountain. Okay, get the parachute laid out, harness on.
The life of Jesus was filled with mountain highs and valley lows. And if I'm following in his footsteps, I've got a lot of ground to cover. Today I'll head south from these Galilee hills to Jerusalem. I'll visit an incredible archaeological find where Jesus actually performed one of his wildest miracles. From there, I'll scale a mountain where many believed Jesus revealed his true identity to his closest friends. I'll share a Last Supper and explore the Mount of Olives, the very site where Jesus was betrayed. In each of these places, Jesus leaves us a clue to his real mission on earth. And that's exactly what I'm after. It's about 80 miles or 130 kilometers from Galilee to Jerusalem. This would have been a week-long journey for Jesus and his friends. But on a modern chariot like mine, it only takes a few short hours. I've always dreamt of coming here. This sacred city is over 5,000 years old and still thriving today. I'm told Jerusalem actually means City of Peace. And yet its entire history is filled with brutal conflict. This is where the Jesus story reaches its dramatic climax, and where the purpose of his renegade mission is finally revealed. Jesus made some pretty dramatic appearances within these city walls. At only 12 years old, he famously ditched his parents and schooled the religious leaders. As an adult, he flipped tables in the temple. He even called out some very powerful and very corrupt people. I would have loved to have seen that. One of my favourite stories was thought to be a myth because historians could find no evidence of a site that is only mentioned in the Gospel of John. But all that changed when archaeologists made a shocking discovery right here in the middle of Jerusalem. It's a place we know as the Pools of Bethesda. As the story goes, these pools held mystical power, and when an angel stirred the water, the first person to enter would be healed. That's where Jesus finds a lame man. After decades of waiting for his miracle, Jesus healed him in an instant. I'm here to meet Danny Harmon, an expert in first century history. Because of his love for Bible archaeology, he's known to most as Danny Digger.
Hey, Danny.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, what a great place.
Yes, this is one of the most fascinating archaeological sites in Jerusalem.
Really?
It also links to the New Testament in such a bright way.
Huh. I mean, you can see it all, can't you? All the different layers.
There are places where you dig and you can find 25 successive layers of construction, destruction, and reconstruction again and again and again.
Yeah.
Here alone, we have the time of Jesus, the time of Asclepius, the Byzantine period, the Crusader period, which became later a mosque, and now it's in Christian hands.
And was this like a formal religious place at all or not?
Yes, first of all, in the days of Jesus, it was related to sacrificial activity and purification. In pagan times, we are standing right now in an area that in late Roman pagan times was associated with pagan healing. They worshipped here Asclepius, the pagan god of healing.
At the time of Jesus, Rome ruled the world. You can still see the evidence in places like England, Turkey, Spain, even here in Israel. And wherever the Romans went, they brought their gods with them. 2,000 years ago, this site was dedicated to Asclepius, son of Apollo, the god of health and healing, which makes this a wild place for Jesus to show up.
So is this the actual where the pools would have been?
Archaeology in the 19th century, research done here proved this is indeed the pool of Bethesda. That's amazing, that we can actually touch base with a story told to us by the Gospel of John, and here we are.
Yeah, but I find it interesting that this is, we know that this is a spot that he would have come, because a lot of the places are, you can't really pin it down, can you?
Yes, the home where he lived in Capernaum, or where he grew up in Nazareth, it was a small home of an ordinary, I would even say a poor family.
Yeah.
Archaeology is good in finding temples, synagogues, public places like these pools, but it doesn't reflect well or doesn't identify well the ordinary homes of the ordinary people.
And what would happen at these pools?
So just 100 meters away from us is a gate of the old city of today. And the text tells us the pool was next to the sheep gate and it had 5 colonnades. And archaeology proved that there is a big complex of 2 pools which could have 4 colonnades on the perimeter and a 5th one in the middle. This was a place where both the sheep were brought into the city to be washed before used for animal sacrifice in the temple, and also the humans came here to immerse their body to purify before going up to the temple.
Yeah.
This was actually a giant mikveh. Do you know what's a mikveh?
No.
It's a Jewish ritual bath.
Yeah.
It's a place that every Jew has to purify according to old law, and especially before you go up to the temple, you must cleanse yourself. You must dip in those purifying water, and then you are ready spiritually to go up to the Temple Mount.
It's actually pretty exciting to be able to stand somewhere where you can say with a strong degree of certainty that Jesus actually was and hung out, because a lot of the places of archaeology tend to be the big temples and the palaces and, the rich places. And so much of Jesus's life and upbringing and the way he lived, he was always at the poorest, worst, dirtiest, grittiest part of town. And those places in archaeology tend to get flattened and lost. I can close my eyes and open it and imagine these pools and Jesus down here. So what, Jesus would have come over the Mount of Olives,
Yes.
down to here?
Yes, he was a native of the Galilee, but he came a few times to Jerusalem according to the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
He, according to the text, sees a sick person. That sick person couldn't reach the water. It was going up and down. It was fluctuating for some reason. And each time the water was being stirred, according to the text, others ran first and got healed. So no one cared for him. So Jesus performs the healing miracle and he heals him.
For 38 years, this man had been unable to walk. He came to a pagan center for healing. Instead, he met the true healer. I like to imagine this as an epic showdown between Jesus, the son of the Hebrew god, versus Asclepius, the son of Apollo. But it's Jesus who shows the real power.
You know, you've got this place brimming with hundreds of people, and then suddenly the paralyzed guy who hasn't walked for years.
This is one of the places where the miracle was probably very public.
Yeah.
A lot of people probably witnessed this.
Yeah.
It also happened on the Sabbath. He's constantly arguing with the Pharisees and others about the Sabbath. The Sabbath should be a day of rest. But Judaism, in his claim, are taking it to a distorted interpretation where nothing is allowed. And Jesus is saying, this is not what God wants.
Of course you can heal on the Sabbath. Love doesn't take a day off, I suppose.
Yeah, that's quite a radical message coming in that time.
Yeah, it's interesting that he goes to the places of mercy, healing, regular people, washing, cleansing. He's not going to the kings and the temples.
Jesus is a social rebel and a miracle maker. Jesus goes to the paralytic, to the leper, to the prostitutes, to the taxmen. Everyone hated the people collecting tax, and even he would address them, okay? And his repeated message is, I come to help the sick, the needed. And this is one of the great places where it demonstrates that.
One of the things Jesus says was that the first will be last and the last will be first. And this healing is another example of Jesus kind of living out what he spoke about. I like that. It's just like, this is a renegade in him, turning everything on its head. And it's like his ministry's starting to get bigger. You know, it's not just in small towns now. It's come to the center of what was essentially the center of the world, Jerusalem. You can sense this energy around him in his life, beginning to build now.
It's easy to see why people loved Jesus. He could really draw a crowd. But when the crowds got too big, you'd often find him withdrawing to the mountains to rest and recover. As someone who loves the outdoors, I can definitely relate. And that's where I'm headed, to Mount Tabor. It's said to be the very spot where Jesus brought his 3 closest friends for the ultimate mountaintop experience. Without a doubt, Jesus is the most pivotal figure in history. His very arrival divides the standard Gregorian calendar in 2, from BC to AD. But people have always been divided on Jesus. He's called a prophet, Messiah, fraud, renegade, and social rebel. But who was he really? According to biblical texts, Jesus answered this question right here on the Mount of Transfiguration.
That's where we're heading. Oh, you can smell something has died around here. Definitely smell a rotting carcass. Oh yeah, look. Dead sheep. Wow. This really smells. And that smell in terms of survival is telling me there's nothing really I can eat on this. If I try and tuck into any of this, look, it's all like putrefying. It's just gonna make me sick. And then in the wild, you get diarrhea, you start vomiting, you dehydrate more. So you've got to be careful the food sources you get. But even at this stage, this is done. And the lone sheep is always going to be vulnerable. You've got to remember out here, you've got jackals, you've got lynxes, you've got wolves. It's why the sheep depend so much on their shepherd. The shepherd's job, keep them safe. And this one definitely wasn't safe on its own. Yeah, this sheep doesn't look like it's died of old age. It's been taken. You can see that the animal's gone in here. Whatever's taken has gone in here. Taken a lot of the soft organs, liver, as much blood as it can, and then left the rest of it. Let's take some of the leg as well and the haunch here. Always vulnerable to predators, especially when you're on your own.
One title Jesus gave himself was the Good Shepherd. I think this offers a clue to his purpose on earth. Jesus sought out the lost lambs of the world, the unloved, the forgotten, the sick, the needy, the rebels and the prodigals. And like a good shepherd, he'd do anything to bring them safely back into the fold, away from predators and away from death, even if it cost him his life.
Hey, Chris. Hey, nice.
Christine Kane is an author, speaker, and activist dedicated to ending modern-day slavery. Her inspiration is the Jesus story, and she has some incredible insight on this Mount of Transfiguration.
Mountains were such a big part of so many of the great Bible stories.
Well, absolutely. You know, like Moses got the 10 Commandments up on the mountain, and Elijah had experiences on the mountains, and Abraham was on a mountain. I mean, it's all the way through the Bible, yeah.
So what is Transfiguration? Explain that one.
Okay, it is one of the most spectacular miracles in the Bible. Really, really important, because what had happened up until this point, you know, a lot of the religious leaders are trying to make Jesus say, well, who are you really? And trying to make, really call him out. Jesus is not playing the game, you know, he's not playing any religious game. So he then brings his 3 closest friends. So you've got Peter, James, and John. They're coming up to a mountain. So just think about this. They've been up on mountains with Jesus. I mean, he's fed the 5,000 on mountains. Stuff has happened, but nothing like this, because when they got to the top there, Jesus, everything begins to change. Suddenly his face, the Bible says, becomes like the sun, as bright as the sun. His clothes are so bright, like magnificently bright.
Well, it's almost like shock of, you know, I mean, you would be pretty freaked out.
Well, yes, you'd be wondering.
You've arrived here at the top of the mountain and suddenly you're seeing like heaven open and Jesus sort of suddenly shining like the sun, as you say.
And then 2 Old Testament figures appear. So you're on a mountain. I mean, they're freaking out right at this point, because you've got Moses, who represents the law. He was given the 10 Commandments. And then you've got Elijah, who represents what, you know, one of the most influential prophets. And so there's a lot going on this mountain.
Jesus' friends had to be freaking out. As they hike up this mountain, it's like the veil between here and eternity is ripped open. Jesus is revealed as more than just a man. His face shines. His clothes radiate with light. That's when 2 legendary Old Testament heroes show up. Moses, the guy who delivered the 10 Commandments, and Elijah, the prophet who called fire down from heaven. And here they were, talking with Jesus. But there's more. Suddenly a cloud appears all around them, and a voice booms from the heavens.
That voice comes in and says, you know, this is my son, listen to him. This is where everything shifts, because at that moment, God the Father is saying, my son is above the law. Listen to his voice above the law. Listen to his voice above the prophets.
So he's like, seems to be showing a whole kind of other, further, deeper, bigger side of himself, a side maybe that they've seen glimpses of in some of the miracles and things, but this seems bigger.
Yeah, so these guys had been walking with Jesus. They'd seen miracles. They had seen the dead raised, lepers healed. They had seen so many miracles, but everyone was still wondering, who really is this guy? Like, is he just a good prophet? Is he just a good teacher? And so there's this surreal moment where Jesus as God is revealed.
I also find it interesting who Jesus brings up here, because if, as you say, you're going to show a glimpse of heaven outside of time and have, Moses and Elijah there, you kind of think maybe you want everyone to see it, but he only seems to bring his closest, not just all the disciples, but his closest
Totally.
disciples.
Not everyone was ready for this. Like people, they love the miracles. They love the teaching. They're like, man, this guy's a great rabbi, a great teacher. And they're watching the miracles. It's like, wow, this is awesome. But they weren't really ready to understand Jesus as God. I mean, that takes time.
And even for, Peter and who was there, John and James,
yeah.
Who'd seen so much, even they is like blows their mind.
This is not anything that is normal or natural. And of course, Peter wants to say, let's memorialize this moment. Let's build a monument. Let's build 3 houses, because everyone, like when you have this great mountaintop experience, we want to stay up here and we want to live here.
Plant your flag, make a sort of a can, a sign, a symbol or something.
And
man loves doing that.
We love doing that. And then we want to just live in this moment. But that's not where they're going to live.
So then they turned around and went back down the mountain. That must have been a trip as well, walking back down thinking, did that just happen?
Exactly. That's what I think, is they would be wondering, did we really see it? Because they were told, don't tell anyone. So they go back to the other 9. What do you do?
So don't go back down the mountain and say what you've seen. Wait.
Exactly.
Jesus, transformed before their very eyes, meeting Moses and Elijah, a booming voice from heaven. And now, Jesus goes on to say, don't tell anyone about this until the Son of Man rises from the dead. Then you're free to talk. Of course, you might know what's about to happen to Jesus, but at the time, his friends had no idea what he was talking about.
And what do you think ultimately was the point of Jesus giving them a little glimpse, pulling back that veil, showing life outside of time and light and all of this glimpse of actually who he really is, not just in his human body? What do you think he really was trying to do?
Everything's about to change, because now Jesus is going to go to his death on the cross, and there's going to be a trial, there's going to be a crucifixion, there's going to be a burial. They're going to think all their hope has died. They're going to think, man, we thought he was the Messiah and really the dude was not. And now they're going to think back and go, but we saw him in his glory on that mountain.
Remember here on the mountain where...
So it's all going to come full circle. James, Peter and John, they've got to remember, when Jesus then is crucified and is put in a tomb for 3 days, they're going to remember this moment and go, hang on a minute.
But that's a cool thing to remember, like when the heavens open and that voice of God. I mean, hearing the voice of God, that must be pretty scary.
It's his way of showing, listen, you've been raised on the law and the prophets. Of course, the Torah, that's so powerful. But you have to understand, this is my son. And you've got to listen to him above everything else.
Yeah, I like those words, listen to him. Because it's so hard in life. There's so many things competing for our attention.
Oh yeah, there is.
And you're never quite sure of this. And they probably felt the same.
And that's the deal. And you come back to those moments where you go, when I don't understand nothing, I remember I saw a glimpse.
Well, it's the answer to so many of my kind of theological wanderings when in my brain, sometimes I go, but how would that be? And then come back just look, seeing a glimpse, here we go, it's good, trust it.
I mean, there's still a journey of faith. You don't just arrive there. So these guys are seeing this miracle in front of their face, and it is so supernatural. But it still takes time to process that. We're just in the middle of the story right now. The story continues, and then when he's buried and he rises again, they're going to be, we remember that moment.
Yeah.
And what he said is true. He did rise again. He must be the Son of God.
After the Transfiguration, Jesus set his sights on Jerusalem. As I head back to the old city, I can't help but wonder if the people thought Jesus was intending to lead a revolution and overthrow the Romans. But all along, he had a different plan in mind. It was Passover, the biggest religious festival of the year. The Jews were celebrating freedom from slavery. Of course, the Romans didn't like anything that smacked of Jewish independence. So at the same time, the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, entered the city with a huge military parade and giant war horses, an attempt to keep the Jews in their place. And that's when Jesus shows up, riding on the back of a little donkey. An absolute renegade move. The people went wild. They shouted, "Hosanna," which means "deliver us." Jesus was welcomed into Jerusalem as a conquering king, the Messiah who would finally set them free from Rome, once and for all.
One of the first things Jesus does when he arrives in Jerusalem is go to the main temple, and he just goes a bit crazy. He starts turning over the tables of all the money lenders, saying they're ruining this place of prayer. Everything just gets more intense. He starts healing the sick, restoring the sight of the blind, the lame, the cripples. His teaching, the crowds get bigger, everything gets bolder. He starts calling out the religious elites and the hypocrites. He starts feasting with the outcasts and the renegades. He is a true maverick in this place, but there's a sense that it's all building to this one crescendo. And all the while, the dark underbelly of the ruling elite start plotting against Jesus.
I'm making my way through the old city to a rooftop near the actual site where Jesus shared a Passover meal with his friends. They didn't know it yet, but this would be their Last Supper. Samuel Smadger has celebrated many Passovers, and now I'm hoping he can tell me more about this pivotal moment in the Jesus story.
So Jerusalem is where Jesus came for this Last Supper,
For this Last
final
Supper.
Passover supper. Who would it have been with?
First of all, he came with his disciple.
Do you always get the feeling that it was very formal and you see those old paintings of it? But I get the feeling that actually this meal
And
would have been
imagine,
very different.
yeah, it was the most joyful meal of the year.
And traditionally it was celebrating what? What does the Passover mean?
The Exodus of Egypt.
So what was that about?
The people of Israel were 400 years as slaves in Egypt.
So the Passover was what? When the Israelites got free from slavery?
Exactly. God commanded the people of Israel that every year to bring a sacrifice, to remember what God did to the people of Israel in Egypt, and that sacrifice is called the Passover. Passover is Pesach, which is the angel of death is Passovering those people who takes the blood of the lamb, put it on their doorpost, and he pass over their house.
To understand the Last Supper, we have to rewind time about 1,000 years before Jesus to one of the most epic stories in the Bible. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt, building cities for a merciless Pharaoh. And then Moses shows up, telling Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Pharaoh refused, and each time God sent a terrible plague upon Egypt, until at last an angel of death claimed the life of every firstborn male child. To escape this judgment, God instructed his people to mark their doors with the blood of a perfect lamb, and the angel of death would pass over their homes. That humble Passover lamb was their redemption from death. The meal the Israelites ate, lamb, herbs, and unleavened bread, would forever be known as a Passover meal, a celebration of how God redeemed his people from slavery and death.
So tell me about the meal. What have we got here?
Okay, first of all, we see that we have
Lamb.
matzah, and wine. During the meal, you drink 4 cups of wine.
I'd never make it down the stairs.
Exactly, that's why it was more happy. That's why everybody's joyful.
Yeah.
Drinking is a big part of the Passover.
What are these? We got locusts here. Do you think we would have had locusts?
I don't know, but I'll let
John
you
the Baptist was locusts.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, it's
You know,
kosher.
John the Baptist is definitely one of my heroes.
Yeah,
in life.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was the ultimate survivor.
No, he was the ultimate survivor, and he was daring to talk the truth.
Wow.
We have also the bitter herbs, who symbolize the bitter time that the people of Israel had
For the 400 years of slavery.
of slavery. And the most important, the lamb, which symbolize the sacrifice. This whole table has to do with one thing, the perfect sacrifice brought here on the altar here in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago.
Every dish here is filled with meaning. The sweet haroset is a paste made from fruit and nuts. It represents the mortar that the Israelites used to build Pharaoh's cities. Karpas is part of the ritual where you dip a herb into salt water, which stands for the tears of suffering. The roasted lamb recalls the sacrifice of that first Passover animal. The wine represents God's redemption from slavery. The matzah is unleavened bread, reminding us the Israelites had no time to let the dough rise. They had to eat the flat bread on the run. And then, at the Last Supper, Jesus brings new meaning to these sacred symbols. He called himself the bread of life, his body stripped and broken, and the wine was his blood, poured out to redeem mankind.
The Last Supper, you got this very symbolic lamb, this sacrificial lamb that's obviously such a huge part of Jewish culture and the Passover. But I see it also in Jesus' life. It started off with these shepherds, didn't it, when we were, hearing their stories and their life. And, almost feels like full circle. Now he's talking about his body and this wine being his blood that's going to be given for all of those friends and disciples round that table with him. And it's almost like it's no accident. It's like the perfect story being crafted. Jesus every step fulfilling all these prophecies and laws, and it's like the boxes are getting ticked more and more as we approach the end.
And we know in the Last Supper, Yeshua took the bread and he said, "This is my body that was broken unto you." Then he takes the cup and he says the wine symbolized the blood, my blood.
Do you think they understood that?
No,
because
I don't think.
It was almost like he kept trying to tell them, "We're going to Jerusalem, and I'm gonna die there."
And they were expecting a Messiah, the king, but the whole ceremony starts with him washing their feet. Did you see any king in the world washing the feet of his servants?
You've got to remember, Jesus and the disciples had done this many times. They'd done it before. They'd come to Jerusalem for the Passover. They'd probably done it twice, at least twice before. And this thing of coming together and having this lamb and this feast and this festival and this celebration of the Jewish people being freed out of slavery. But this one was different, and it's like Jesus keeps hinting at it, keeps saying, we're going to go to Jerusalem, but I'm going to be betrayed and killed. And it's like nobody kind of gets it. What's he talking about here? I get this kind of sense that, Jesus and his friends, these rough fishermen, as you talk about, have traveled up here and they're tired and they reach it and they want to celebrate this Jewish Passover. And they're hungry and the food's on the table and it looks so delicious like this. And they're about to dive in. And then he does this mic drop moment of saying, one of you here is going to dip this. And then suddenly...
And he's going to betray me.
Yeah.
Judah realized that Yeshua knows. Instead of coming and repenting, he chose to stick to his plan, but he cannot celebrate.
So what does he do?
He get up and he leaves. Now all the disciples knows that he's the one.
Judas. He was one of Jesus' closest friends. He had witnessed some miracles, and now he betrayed him. To most people, Jesus was a hero, maybe even a Messiah that they'd been waiting for. But to the ruling elite, Jesus was a threat. And that's what Judas was banking on. In a secret bargain with the Jewish chief priests, Judas agreed to hand over Jesus for just 30 silver coins.
Judas knows the game is up and gets up and leaves, and this Last Supper ends, and then it gets dark, hard, and terrifying.
It's hard to imagine a bigger plot twist. Only days ago, crowds of people had welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem as their Messiah, their conquering king. And then, during their Last Supper together, Judas suddenly left. He'd gone to betray Jesus. Meanwhile, Jesus spent a sleepless night in a quiet olive grove at the base of the Mount of Olives. And I've come to see this place for myself. This might be the darkest moment of his life.
So this is the Garden of Gethsemane, just outside the city walls. And this is where Jesus came to the night before he gave himself up to the authorities. And he spent that time on his knees praying. Jesus had to make the hardest decision of his life, whether he would fulfill his destiny and do, as he said, lay down his life for all of humankind, or would he walk away from the pain and the torture and the humiliation? They actually say that blood oozed out of his sweat gland. The fear was so great, he bled fear. Never had so much rested on the shoulders of one man.
It's not hard to picture the scene. For 2,000 years, this moment has been captured in virtually every art form. Jesus kneeling in the Garden of Gethsemane, begging God to spare him from the terrors of the cross. Nearby, Peter, James and John have fallen asleep. It's like they still couldn't grasp what was about to happen. This had to be the lowest point for Jesus, and for me, the most relatable. Even Jesus had to wrestle with his own unanswered prayer, but in the end, he willingly surrenders his life and sticks with the mission as he cries out to his heavenly Father, "Not my will, but yours be done." Suriel Bar David is a trusted guide and biblical expert. When I first met him, we explored the early events in Jesus' life. Now I'm learning about Jesus' final days.
And so much of that night, I hear about it. You kind of can feel the terror, the nerves of that.
I myself think that it's probably the hardest moment of Jesus, except for being on the cross that night. It's late. Why? Because he had to take the decision. Should I go on with the mission that I'm at, or should I take a different path? That was the T-junction point, I would say that. It's cold, it's dark, it's late at night. They were already so-called celebrating the Passover, so maybe 11 o'clock at night. It's a long night, and he's tired, 24 hours, you know, with his disciples a lot. And now suddenly something is happening.
What were the disciples doing?
He told them, stay awake and pray. And he left them just a little bit farther. He was going on and he was praying, and they fell asleep, and he goes back and forth and he wakes them up. They are tired, they are after a meal. So suddenly the guards are coming and they are surrounded, okay? And they come in order to arrest him with Judas that was leading them.
What did Judas do?
Judas is coming and kissing him, basically to tell them, the one that I will kiss, he is the man, in a sense. To point at Jesus, he is the one that should be arrested.
With a single kiss, Judas completes the most infamous betrayal in history. As the guards arrest Jesus, he remains calm, but not his disciples. This seems to be the moment when they finally wake up and realize that this story is not going the way they thought it would.
And what did the disciples do?
So most of them do nothing except for one guy, Peter. He grabbed a sword, probably some kind of a knife that he brought with him, you know, to try and attack the guards that arrest Jesus. And I would say, it doesn't say so. I say he went for the throat. Eventually he cuts the ear. I guess the guard was moving backward and then his ear was cut off.
So he hits the guy's side of his head, takes his ear off.
Yeah, right. And we see that Jesus immediately stops him. You know, don't do that. This is not what I came for. You know, I'm not coming here in order to fight with weapon. I can call my Father and he can send legions of angels to protect me. I'm coming here for a whole different purpose. We should love, basically, our enemies.
So what did Jesus do?
He takes the ear, in a sense, and he put his hand and he heals that servant's ear. Everything now is fine. You know, it's a miracle. But he's willing to give himself for those guards.
Why did people go so quickly from loving him to then hating him and spitting on him and calling for his crucifixion?
I think that most of the people around Judea, and especially Galilee, they liked Jesus. But they expected for a local Messiah that would lead them and set them free from the Romans. The Romans were oppressing them. And Jesus didn't come to do that. He came to set us free from a spiritual point of view, not from the Romans. It doesn't matter if it's the Romans, if it's the Assyrians, the Babylonians, or anyone else. That's not the point. Who is controlling over you? You can be free. You can be free if Jesus set you free. And They didn't get that. The people didn't get that. So they were expecting him to lead a revolt with a sword, like Peter thought. And Jesus said, no, this is not the purpose of my coming here.
Why would you want him dead?
When he put himself as God, they couldn't handle that anymore. And that's the moment in the stories before that they said, we have to get rid of him. We have to kill him. If he put himself, if he forgives sins, this is what he says, it's only God can do such a thing. Only God can forgive sins. And he says, I'm forgiving sins. We have to get rid of that guy. Yeah.
So it almost feels like with the everyday people who heard his message, he was so gentle and so fun and loving and always healing and helping. But with the spiritual leaders, he said, you're going in the wrong direction, essentially.
Exactly. You are responsible for leading those people to the wrong way.
Like that same shepherd analogy that always seems to be in Jesus' life, like looking after, protecting.
Right. And he cares for everyone. He goes for the one lost sheep. You know, he would leave the 99 and he will go for that one to bring it all the way back to the flock.
He always goes for the person you think is lost and no hope and outside and rejected.
And the one that maybe we normally wouldn't even see. He would always see them.
So when Jesus is saying to Peter no, and healing that ear and saying no, what is he saying? My way is a different way.
Yeah, it's a completely different way. I came to bring forgiveness and love.
So after he restores the guard's ear,
he's being arrested.
Then he's arrested, and what do the disciples do?
They all run away. And two of them, John and Peter, they are the only ones that are mentioned that still follow Jesus. They follow the guards that arrest Jesus, and they take him all the way to the high priest's house, to Caiaphas' house, and they follow him. And they even go all the way inside to the open courtyard there of that villa to see what's happening with Jesus.
For me, it's the bit I never think about in that story, you know, just the raw terror of like, it begins.
Jesus came here to this world, to a world that doesn't necessarily love him. And we see that people were around him, arresting him, cursing him, spitting on him, beating him, humiliating him, all those kind of things. What does he say on the cross? Forgive them. So his whole attitude is completely different that you would expect from any, I would say maybe historical character that came to this world to lead some kind of change, revolution, whatever you want to call it.
The bit I feel in here is like that this feels raw courage, from sweating blood to going that way. It's like, what do they say? Courage isn't not being scared. Courage is feeling it deep in your bones, but still doing it.
Yeah, willing to, in a sense.
What's also clear to me is that nobody had forced Jesus into this situation, somehow like forced him into a corner. It feels like he is here of his own choice, his decision, on his terms. And remember that time after time, Jesus had told his disciples what was going to happen, where they were going, what lay ahead. But it's almost like the disciples never really understood it. When I think of the life of Jesus, and even my own journey in the Holy Land, I get the sense that everything that happened that night was so destined. Just take a look back. Before the Last Supper and the Mount of Transfiguration, before walking on water and the baptisms in the Jordan River, a baby was born in Bethlehem. This rural town was known for sheep. Lowly, simple sheep. But Bethlehem lambs were special. The finest amongst them were destined for Jerusalem, for the most important festival of the year, Passover. You see, only a perfect lamb, born in Bethlehem, could be sacrificed for the people's redemption. And if you know the story, you know where this adventure is headed next.